Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds. Hello, I'm Paul Obertelli and welcome to another edition of THA Talks, the alternative podcast show from the UK. Our talks include news, conspiracies, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion and much more. If you'd like to check out our full archive, just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. And if there's anyone who'd like to contact us and give us some feedback, maybe you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, you can email us info@thatalks.com, or you can go to our website and contact us via the contact tab there. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show via our RSS feed, and you can also find us on iTunes and Stitcher and many other podcast directories out there. Well, thanks again for joining me here on THA Talks. It's always a pleasure. And I have another fascinating guest for you again, as always, this week. It's a subject that we haven't covered here on THA Talks yet, and it's one that I've wanted to. We're going to be speaking with Claire Ray Randall, who's actually a transsexual, and she's done a lot of shows talking about that and the science behind it, and to a level of controversy, because it seems to be a controversial subject at the moment, where the idea of accepting it and obviously allowing these people to be happy in society and not be persecuted, which is absolutely correct. And also just the general perception of what it is, what's transgenderism and transsexualism, what it is, how to perceive it. And it's kind of, in some ways, it's at least trying to change the whole structure of gender and this kind of stuff. And it's very controversial. A lot of debates out there about it. I mean, I think you have to be very an unpleasant person not to allow people that are different in society the chance to live a good life and to enjoy their lives like everyone else. But at the same time, we see with this crazy social justice warriorism that's out there, as usual, there's a lot of resentment around these subjects because of the way some are carrying it forward and politicising it. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that with Claire. Also her book, Waking the Monkey, Becoming the 100th Monkey. So we're going to be talking about that and a few other bits and pieces as well, because she obviously indulges in a lot of things. It isn't just, she's not just there talking about transsexualism because of what she is, who she is, but obviously she's got a lot to say. So I'm really looking forward to this one. And without any further ado, I think before we should go to the other side of London for a surgeon, a dramaturge, and a man called David Parry.
Some enchanted evening, you will see a stranger, you will see a stranger across a crowded room. Good evening, Mr. Obertelli. Have you missed my songs?
I have very much. I've missed your songs. Again, it seems like a while since you've been here with me. How are you doing? All right?
It is a while since I think I've done that song before, actually. It is a while because I'm a busy bee at the minute, but yeah. Too long. I've missed you and I've missed THA.
Yes, and we've missed you as well. It's we've obviously had John White on the show a few times, and Shana's been kicking ass with Stephanie. But we do like to hear from our resident host, Mr. David Parry.
Always a pleasure and good to be back alive. Come into this evening's interview rather late in the day, I confess that.
Well, yeah, it's been a short notice one because I've kind of been so unorganised myself, but Claire's very interesting. She's got a lot of qualifications, she's very smart, and obviously transsexualism is a subject we haven't touched on before, so that added to the interest of getting her on the show. It's obviously nowadays as well. It's quite a kind of controversial subject in some movements, and it's just something we hear quite a lot about. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Oh, Paul, don't get me wrong. I mean, free thoughts and open minds. Yes, we've not tackled this particular subject before. I'm looking forward to it immensely.
Let's go. Hello, Claire. Welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. It's most exciting.
Well, I'm very, very happy that you accepted our invitation. We haven't touched on the subjects that we're going to be talking about today on the show before, so we're excited about that. We also want to talk about your book, Waking the Monkey, Becoming the 100th Monkey, that you've had out. That's got very popular and is people are very excited about it. So we're going to be talking about that later. You're a very interesting person. I've listened to you on other interviews before. You've obviously got a different perspective on certain views around transsexualism and the social justice warrior movement. This is what makes your perspective interesting, because obviously there's so many different perspectives out there, and the mainstream one is a little bit different to perhaps how you see things. How about you let us know a bit about your book and how you got started, and just a bit about yourself?
My book, it's about basically the origins of the New Age that we now see being manifested quite kind of widely in our society these days. It's based on my own experiences when I went to a New Age camp called the Hundredth Monkey camp in the 1990s. And it was really quite an extraordinary experience. But my own experience of it was very different from, I think, what the organisers wanted. We'll probably better go into my own, personal background a little bit first, in that, as some of your listeners will know, I'm a transsexual woman, and I went through that process in the mid-1980s. So when I went to the 100th Monkey Camp, this was already behind me, but at the same time I was carrying a certain level of, what you might say, otherness with me. And I've had a bit of difficulty fitting in at the camp, and it wasn't because everybody was saying, there's that tranny, but it seemed to be more working at a much more kind of subtle level, where I engaged with what I carried, what many would call like the trickster archetype energy. And this has kind of been a path that I've, meandered along my whole life. And the two streams of my own gender identity issues and the New Age seem to have kind of got woven together in a strange way, even though it's completely unintentional on my part. So what the camp was intending to do was try and create what they was described as a morphic field of progress, forwardness in world events. And I'll get onto this later, but I think that it did. Well, there's some very strange, curious synchronicities around it, which I've only, in the last year or so, really come to understand. But what I got from it was a greater sense of my own personal spiritual empowerment, which I had not, anticipated as part of the process. Because obviously going through, my transsexual transition in the 80s, it was I was kind of on the edge, felt quite outcast. I mean, one thing that I feel very strongly that kind of relates in an oppositional kind of way to where the world is with the trans agenda is that the way that it went for me was is that this was an extremely marginal thing. I had to overcome not least my own resistance to it, my feeling about society, the general, sort of, it wasn't a mainstream part of society in those days. Yeah. And I actually think this is right. So I went through that, and I kind of consolidated a new identity long before the current kind of cultural Marxist agenda of promoting transgenderism came along, quite recently, within the last 5 to 10 years. So I feel I'd probably better just maybe pause there a little bit and let you come back on what I've said already before I take it any further, Paul.
No, yeah, that's, I think what's very interesting. I've listened to some you talk in interviews before. Is it's just interesting because you come from such a level-headed perspective. Because obviously you've been through this stuff before in your own life, and so many. It's almost like when you listen to the social justice warrior movement and on the YouTube and stuff. It's giving you a perspective that people like you are this very angry at the world that they should be getting them how they want them to get them, whereas I think most transsexuals and stuff like that just they are what they are. They want to live their lives and get on with it and be happy just like everyone else, and they don't really want to sort of convert people's way of thinking and anything like they just want to live peacefully, be accepted for what they are. And it's a case of the difference between acceptance, a society accepting this kind of stuff and understanding it's there, it is what it is, live and let live, to the agenda of changing the way people think in general. And it's like it uses that to do this to people, but and then makes out that trying to find the best way to describe this, as it does that, it's almost like causing a false image of what most transsexuals are like anyway.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, when I went through my process in the 1980s, I'd been fighting with myself throughout most of through the whole of my early 20s. And as I started approaching my late 20s, I realised this was something I had to do or completely abandon. But it was designed to reduce my levels of stress within myself, and so that I could function better. It had absolutely nothing to do with feeling constrained by social ideas of gender binary or anything like that. I was quite clear which gender I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And I could just see that the social gender that I wanted to be was different from the one that I found myself in. So it was a matter of changing myself to fit in with existing paradigms of binary gender and sex that I felt I was basically just anomalous. I mean, this is the way I describe it. Some people say, "Oh, but there's male and there's female, and then there's nothing else. And you're either male or you're female. You've got a Y chromosome, then you're male. You've got two X chromosomes, then you're female." But they don't understand that there are developmental, antenatal in the womb, the developmental influences which can do anomalous things to the brain. And I just say that transsexuals are an anomaly in the same way that intersex are, because there are intersex conditions whereby a genetic male with a Y chromosome can develop as a completely morphological female, and the only problem is that when she grows up, she won't be fertile. Now, for people to say, "Oh, well, that's she's a man," is obviously, it's completely non-functional. So we have to kind of accept that there are intermediate anomalous, conditions.
Yeah. But
that this is not in any way socially created, or I should say, in nature, it's not socially created, but of course we have seen in society within the last 5 to 10 years this tremendous about turn on this subject, whereby suddenly it's all the rage, and suddenly it's fashionable, and people are trying to get their children to have sex changes, and it's just like, what has happened with this?
Did that feel strange to you? Did you kind of, because you'd obviously spent a lot of time in your own head thinking what's going on and having to sort yourself out and make yourself happy, and then all of a sudden when you were in that position, it was very you probably, I mean, it's probably quite a lonely time in the days that you were going through this, and then all of a sudden, like you say, you've seen it fashionable. Did it seem fishy at first, or was it something that you had to wake up to?
When I saw, is it nearly 2 or 3 years ago now, when Caitlyn Jenner came on the scene and announced that she was going to go through this, and I wasn't aware of Caitlyn Jenner or Bruce Jenner, but I think Caitlyn Jenner got the Woman of the Year award. Is it 2015, 2016? And everybody is lionizing her and everything. What a wonderful. And I thought, well, I didn't get this sort of, approval when I did it 30 years ago and more. And nobody's, saying, well, where are those brave trans women who have been fighting this for decades and generations? And what's it about this media person, who's suddenly getting all this attention? This is somebody who has lived in an identity which has relied on a very masculine body. Let's face this. You don't get to be an Olympic athlete who wins whatever it is, gold medals, like that, and then spend the next 30 years, living off that image and that identity, without it kind of, having some impact. And I'm not saying that Caitlyn Jenner shouldn't have done it. I mean, as you say, live and let live. But it's the media attention. I think if Caitlyn Jenner wanted to go and do this, then she should have gone away privately and got it sorted out on her own in reclusion, in the way that people like I had to in the 1980s, because it's only then that you can really know where you are with this. And I think that I've seen pictures of Caitlyn Jenner that she looks really unhappy, and I think that she probably understands now that she's being used.
Well, yeah, I think used is the word, really, because it's like you're not to accept something. If someone's got something that's different about them, you have to learn to accept what you are, and then you become a stronger person. You deal with it. You don't do it by the whole strategy. Oh, you don't need to deal with who you are. We're just going to love you and that's not really dealing. You've got to accept who you are in any walk of life, whatever it is. I mean, what we were talking a little bit off air about it with this new Doctor Who thing with the female now playing the part, and it's like, I'm sorry, it annoys me, not because I don't like women or because I don't like seeing lead women roles. I love strong female characters; they're awesome, and I'd go and see them, no problem. But it's the replacement, it's the political side to it, and I think that is that's really what's niggling people at the moment. By all means, create a new strong female lead and character like Lara Croft and stuff like that. That's great. But it's the agenda. It's the agenda. There's something going on.
There is. Well, I mean, you see this. It's something that's happened in the last few years. It's become almost obligatory. I mean, you've got this talk about. I don't really follow movies and the cinema and that kind of thing very well, but I know there's been a lot of talk about Bond being cast as a black actor.
That's right, yeah. And Jane Bond, I think that's popped up a couple of times.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, when I was a teenager, like a lot of teenagers, I read the James Bond books, and you'd have to change the entire background history of James Bond. And then you have Marvel comics. When I was 14, I used to love Marvel comics, but apparently now their sales are dropping because they've introduced lots of trans, bisexual, whatever characters, or they've suddenly characters they've had for a long time have been doing these things. I mean, again, I don't follow it because it's just totally ludicrous. It's completely different from what they were doing many years ago. And then, to come back to where we started on this Doctor Who, well, I first saw Doctor Who as a child in 1963, just a few episodes after it first started. And I've been following it ever since. I was very pleased to see it come back. Was it 10, 12 years ago or something? But what they've done to it since then is they've kind of butchered it with, it's just constantly introducing, challenging themes, I think is the way they like to produce it, put it forward. And when I saw that they'd cast a female actor for Doctor Who, I thought this is just such an unoriginal idea now, because it reminds me of something I I read in one of the books that Christopher Tolkien wrote about his father's manuscripts, and Tolkien said at one point he had Frodo going up on Hen and looking out and seeing Sauron and just escaping, and then in the first manuscript, excuse me, Tolkien had Aragorn coming up and having a very similar experience, and then he wrote next to it, "Not artistic, find a better plot line," and This is the director of entertainment at the BBC should have said that. This is just a completely predictable plot line. They've been mooting it since the early 1980s. Now, if in 1981 or 82 or something they had cast Joanna Lumley, as apparently was mooted, that would have been quite an interesting thing. It would have been challenging, it would have been original, and it would have caused people to talk about this in a constructive way. But what we have now, in the wake of all the cultural Marxist stuff that we've endured for the last few years, it is just completely predictable. We just knew this was coming.
Yeah,
it's a mixture of feminism, cultural Marxism, promotion of the transgender agenda, whereby we were talking about this earlier, with Caitlyn Jenner, and now the move to try and, begin transsexual treatment for children as young as 4. Now, I had transsexual feelings at the age of 4, but I think if I'd had medical intervention at that stage, I think it would have probably traumatized me, endlessly.
You just got to let yourself grow up, because I mean, a lot of people, a lot of youngsters, they have homosexual feelings. It's all part of growing up. Your emotions, maybe even you've had trauma in your life that's shaken things up. When you get to your sort of 14, 15, you start to find yourself, and I think in society now, they always say, "Oh, we've got to teach 5-year-olds this." I think nowadays, if you get to 15, 16, and you pretty much know that you're transsexual or gay or whatever, you're living in a society where it's not like you have to keep it a secret because you're going to be chased down the street. That's not what rightfully that's not like what is anymore. But it's I think I was speaking to David a while earlier on, and it's almost like the difference between libertarianism, which is live and let live. You can be what you want to be. I want to be what we think, how we want to think, and liberalism, which seems to be more now relying on the state to implement liberty, which means that someone's got the iron fist. You know what I mean? Whether they think they're being nice or not, a one size fits all doesn't fit. You've got to respect difference. But yeah, very, very interesting. I mean, it was with Ghostbusters as well. You had that and it didn't do great. I haven't seen it, but I've heard people talk about it, and it's because you've taken a classic and it's got you've got the alpha male type in Bill Murray. I can't Venkman, Peter Venkman, I think his character's called. But it always seems to be these characters that are replaced. It's not a creative process; it's a replacement. These kind of alpha types. And usually, and just iconic figures, and people don't like to see it. In fact, most people don't like to see it, and it's blatant. It's always.
How can you replace Bill Murray?
Yeah.
I mean, Bill Murray is Bill Murray. He's a cinematic icon. It's just ludicrous to try and. It's like I say, it's the Tolkien thing. It's unartistic. It's just. It's just. I think that's one of the things I'd like to say about actually cultural Marxism. What I think is so great about cultural Marxism is that they're so clumsy. Do you know what I mean? They kind of have to labour something like this, so that to the point where it's obvious they've always got bad timing. It's like Graham Chapman saying about Shakespeare in Monty Python. You've got to get all the words in the right order. The cultural Marxists might get their words in the right order, but get their timing completely wrong. So they give themselves away, I suppose, is what I'm saying, by their clumsiness and their inarticulate lack of artistic sensibility.
Well, I mean, for me, looking back at my life, there's more racism, more sexism, more misogyny around today than there ever has been in my life, and it's around the same time that these agendas are being pushed. I don't think they're helping. They are making men become misogynist. They are probably creating more people resent people that are like transsexual because they've got this feeling that it's being thrown at them and opposing them, so they're hitting back more. And I'm not saying there wasn't any problems before, But, you know, we were certainly going in the right direction. You know, there was no, oh my God, look what's happening. And all of a sudden, this urgency from them has just created more of it. And it makes you wonder, is that what it was created to really create these divisions to begin with, you know?
Yeah, well, I think that the absolute glaring example of that is Obama. Now, he ended his 8 years saying what a bunch of racists the country was and how they had to learn, and Hillary was all saying this and everything. And I thought, hey, hang on, just do a quick retake on this. How did he get elected in 2008 as the first black president in American history if the majority white American population, and remember, he didn't have so many, you know, illegal voters and stuff in those days. How did he get voted if all this 65% of the white population were racist? It couldn't happen. He couldn't have got in just on the black vote alone, because that's only whatever is 15% or something, you know.
Yeah.
So obviously, it's nonsense, and we've seen what's happened since the Ferguson riots in Baltimore, that race antagonism in America has, you know, increased massively, and we see, I think, the same thing in this country. There's, you know, much more tensions than there used to be, and I think people don't like having this, you know, rammed down their throats all the time, as you say.
It's almost like, if you want to create division, make it that it's impossible not to be divided, because for people to stand their ground of certain things, you've got to be aggressive, and then that causes other people to be aggressive. And I think it's a little bit like the bullying thing, the whole with society at the moment. Everything you've got to not be bullied, so sometimes you've got to learn to hit back. But that should deal with it. That's just enough to say, listen, you know, this is the way we want it. Don't push any further. But with the whole neoliberalism and the cultural Marxism, it seems to be teaching people not to hit back. Just hold your hands up and let it run you over. And it's a dangerous ideology. But I can sense that David Parry is getting a bit itchy to come into this one. So I think we should. David, what you're making of all this?
Oh, I was so determined not to get involved, but I think I've got to say my 5 pence of it. Certainly, it's a true honour and privilege to have Claire on the show. I'm a great
thank you so much, David.
Well, I'm a great admirer of you as a person as well as your work. So
thank you so much.
I'm very excited about the show. I mean, as a diehard libertarian and an absolutely rampant homosexual, I don't resonate with the word gay at all. I'm not gay, homosexual. I must admit, what I resent mostly is the fact I had to correct a social justice warrior the other day, who will have to remain named, that the whole point of being homosexual is you want to go out with a man, not some milksop sort of androgynous figure in the middle, and was greeted with such disdain that I thought, my God, you're now telling me how to be homosexual. Absolutely unbelievable.
Well, can I just say at that point, I mean, obviously, masculinity is verboten these days, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, I think, I'm an admirer and basic agreement. You're a very brave lady and all sorts of things.
Well, thank you so much.
Oh, you are. Let's get to the more esoteric stuff. That's my one, really.
Oh, yeah.
I noticed when I was doing some digging, you have a lot to say about Jung. Now, I'm a regular participant in Jung Club London, and I was mesmerised by what you had to say. I mean, his idea of a collective unconscious, I mean, certainly it wouldn't be the universal unconscious. I believe that's Carus. But the idea of some binding, deep resource that allows us to discover deep symbolic truths about ourselves, that rang so true to me in your work, and I thought you gave it a whole new type of expression. What's your attitude to Jung nowadays, from the beginning maybe, and did you find him a help in your life and in your work?
Oh, crumbs. Well, I have to admit I don't keep up with current, Jungian research as such. So I don't know what the current debates and discourses are around him, but I think the the relation Jung has towards alchemy, I mean, because I feel, to a certain extent, the process that I went through was a kind of an alchemical process, not just the transmutation of the body and but in the run up to it, in the acceptance of the fact that this was actually something I couldn't change about myself, and it was like. Well, it was like that comment in that line, and I think it's the Gospel of Thomas, which says, you must bring forth that which is within you, or else that which is within you will destroy you. And so I felt that this was in some way some kind of archetypal thing within me. It was almost like it was my own personal logos. And when I did my art therapy training in the early 80s, which was very, very important in helping me sort out my conflicts about this, I remember I've always been interested in Egyptian mythology and history, and so when I was doing my art therapy training in 81, 82, I remember looking at stuff about ancient Egyptian gods, particularly Osiris, in the college library, and kind of debating with myself whether there were true principles or whether everything was just relative to situations. And obviously I think the Osiris god form or archetype is an archetype which truly helped Egypt. Egypt was a civilization that survived and regenerated itself and came back after declines, because it believed in. It had images and archetypes like Osiris, which is an archetype of the seasonal regeneration of the Nile, and because they worshipped gods that were appropriate to their situation, that's why they were able to survive so long. In my own path, I had to kind of deal with this archetype within myself, which was this would be the Jung's anima, as he would have called it, in my previous identity, was really so strong that it needed to be rebalanced. So that I could feel, just get past that feeling of stress and dislocation within myself. I mean, I don't know if that answers what your question was about, but
I think it does. I mean, a wonderful exegesis. I know you mentioned a lot about the New Age, Claire, but I detect there are deeper resources in you. I mean, would you say you're an esotericist? And if you are, do you practice a particular type of discipline?
Well, I would call myself an esotericist, yes, and I do meditate, and I'm very interested in Tolkien and Lewis, and I think they have a very interesting kind of conflation, as I call it, of Christianity and northern Asatru paganism, Odinist. Because that's basically what Christianity turned out to be. And I think Christianity has kind of lost that element that made it the creative force that it was in the Middle Ages. Obviously, the medieval European civilization it's a kind of encapsulated kind of world of its own, really, isn't it? And it it was it produced the Renaissance as well, and things went a little bit kind of wobbly a little bit after that. So I'm kind of quite eclectic in my path and my spiritual kind of traditions, although I mean, I've done lots of stuff in the past, Kabbalah, transcendental meditation, lots of different things. So,
well, eclecticism is also part of the trickster archetype. So that would...
well, yes, and obviously that's a big. I mean, that was a thing in my book. I found myself playing the trickster archetype at, the 100th Monkey camp in 1995, and I kind of ended up revisiting it again, completely against my will. So it must have been an unconscious, eruption at the following two camps, the 1996 and 97 camps as well. And I mean, it's kind of humbling to think that you go to an event like this and the situation is set up sort of in such a way that entirely beyond your control, it triggers these massive archetypes to be released from your unconscious. And I think, the 100th Monkey camps were in their own way an archetype of the New Age. And just as I think that so much of this current that's been coming out since the late 19th century, Blavatsky and everything that's followed since then, there's so much of it that has got controlled, taken over, exploited, and so forth. So I think there was an element of that in the 100th Monkey camp. I think that there is a very strong element of that in the whole New Age movement. And it's very interesting, 20-odd years on, to see the kind of things that people were promoting in the late 80s, early 90s, New Age movement, one world consciousness and everything, that I have to confess I completely bought into at the time. But then kind of my bubble burst with this in the last few years as I was approaching the completion of my book, which took me many, many years. But I'm glad that it did, because I didn't fully understand when I completed the first draft manuscript quite kind of where they'd been trying to take this. And so fortunately I had time to just subtly change a few perceptions to kind of make the book more comprehensive. But at the same time, I had to I couldn't really go into this in kind of a big way, because I didn't want to put anything in that I didn't really know at the time of the camp in the 1990s. So it was a bit of a balancing act between trying to hint that there were other things going on and at the same time not recounting anything that I didn't know or experience at the time.
Well, I think this ties in with a wonderful phrase I saw, metaphysical realism. What do you mean by that, Claire?
I'm thinking in terms of living at an archetypal level, because it kind of came to me, and somebody gave me a thumbs up for this on social media. I think I said something to the effect of, "We're not going to get out of this situation we're in at the moment, the whole collapse of Western civilization thing, simply through formal, mechanical, political means. We have to engage with our own archetypal forces to be able to make some, progress and fight back on this." So I myself, I do try to stand back from the detail in life and see the greater patterns that are happening. Because, for instance, when people do things that we don't like, quite often the justification they may well believe that they give verbally is often not the real motivation. The real motivation comes from from unconscious drives and desires and things, which are often the kind of things that people don't like to admit to. So, anyway, I'm not sure how you think about that.
Let me expand that. I know Paul's desperate to get me off, but there's one last I was thinking, I noticed you playing around with Jung and UFOs, and of course, the latter Jung did write a book about UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that you're in touch with celestial intelligences, these deep primary forces? Do you feel they're guiding you? Do you feel they're inspiring you? Or, is it just sort of light at the end of the tunnel? I mean, do you think you have a relationship with them, and what would it be?
Well, I think... yeah, well, actually, I'm kind of... That's a really interesting question. I think I am, to some extent, but I wouldn't claim that it's kind of conscious. I think these archetypal entities, I think they do exist. I mean, I think there is many different forms of them, and some of them are malign, some of them are positive, and they all want to kind of get in on the action here on this very interesting place we call the, three-dimensional planet Earth. I mean, I mentioned this in one chapter when in the 100th Monkey camp, we were meditating on the problems in Jerusalem. Now, remember, this is 20 years ago, so things weren't quite so bad, but the voice pretty bad, I suppose. But I had this sense while we were doing that meditation that there was some kind of being hovering over Jerusalem. And whether this is Yahweh and whether Yahweh is the same as Allah, I don't know. But I did get a sense there was some kind of massive archetypal thought being that was, kind of manipulating people and stuff. And I think there are those, and they do have agendas, but I think we also have our own guides. And I kind of have a guide who kind of pops up from time to time. He's a bit unreliable, but maybe that's my own receptivity. I don't know. But also, I think that, well, I'd like to mention this stage. I've just read a really excellent book by, you may have heard of Dr. Jason Reza Georgiani and his book, Prometheus and Atlas. Yeah, absolutely superb. I've just reread one of the chapters because it's so dense, and he covers everything from, Descartes to Rupert Sheldrake. Yeah. But what he proposes is he's proposing that what he calls the spectral dimension, and this is an excellent word because it relates both to the word spectrum. In other words, it's an extended spectrum that's just outside of, our own frequency, as it were, but also that it relates to the word spectral, which, spectre, as in a kind of ghostly thing. And so this is, he relates to all sorts of evidence about remote viewing and so forth. And this is where he ties into Jung and the UFO phenomenon. And I think the main problem that we have at the moment in understanding these spectral phenomena is that it's just too big a thing. There's too much going on in it, and people want to narrow it down to very narrow categories. And the whole this is the whole parapsychology area. It's kind of far too limited in the way that, they try to do tests on this. And I think Jung had a far larger, conception of what this was like. I mean, I don't know whether this is the right point to get into it. It might be, but there were a number of synchronicities, big and small, that occurred with me around the camp, mostly to do with timing, not just things happening at the same time, but sequencing, like I was saying earlier about things happening at the right time. And this is just a coincidence which is just too bizarre for me to miss, right? So now, obviously, what we were trying to do at the camp, we was trying to create some kind of morphic field of consciousness that would unite people, make people feel friendly, resolve problems, things like that, right? So we were meditating on all these world issues that were happening at the moment. There was the atomic testing in the Pacific. There was Bosnia, Sarajevo. I'll just give you a quick one. If you've read the chapter about Sarajevo, you'll know that while we were meditating on trying to save Sarajevo from being bombed and cleansed and everything, the bread cube bomb, which led to the NATO involvement, which to this day there's a lot of evidence that it might have been a false flag carried out on its own people by the occupants of Sarajevo. Anyway, we were meditating at the moment that happened. Now, I find that really scary and rather creepy, but there's at least that was at the same time, so we kind of debated about it, and it was like, someone's messing around with things here, maybe, or maybe it's just a coincidence. But the much larger one that I only kind of considered last year was that towards the end of the camp, now think about this date. This date was the 1st of September 1995. We did a meditation on the world in 20 years' time. 1st of September 1995. And one of the I probably should have put more in about this, but I didn't want to repeat. So the first comment I put back from the meditational feedback was about water, about people being surrounded by water. And we all thought this was somebody saying, oh, well, I'm meditating for 2015, and in 2015, the sea levels will have risen so much that we'll all be drowning in water. And we all thought, oh, yes. Well, of course, 2015 came along and their predicted sea level rises hadn't happened. Now, obviously, I got the book out in the spring of 2015 because I wanted it to be out well in advance of the 20th anniversary. And I did go to actually a 20th anniversary camp where there was just half a dozen people from the camp and one other person. But I wanted to get this done before that happened. So what is it? Anyway, the 1st of September came around, and I didn't really think about this. I wasn't thinking about a particular date. Now, I don't know if I said the 2nd of September 2015 or the 3rd of September, you'd know what happened on those days. But what happened on the 1st of September? It's related to what happened on the 2nd and 3rd. Think about the first 3 days of September in 2015. Well, the 3rd of September was, which is kind of an interesting date because that's when the Second World War started. The 3rd of September was when Merkel opened the borders. The 2nd of September was when Alian Kurdi died. Right, sorry. 3rd of September was when the newspaper headlines hit about it and Merkel responded. The 2nd of September was when he was actually washed up on the beach and died. And the night before, the night of the 1st of September 2015, was when his father and the family set off in that rubber dinghy. So 20 years on exactly from when we were meditating, Alian Kurdi's father was preparing to take him on the water. And I just couldn't wonder whether that thing that people were picking up in the water was something about this. Now, I have a sense in retrospect that it's kind of a deep thing to go back into, and I probably can't go into it fully, but I now have reason to believe that there was that although obviously they weren't, this wasn't being planned, but that nonetheless this was in some way some kind of synchronistic magic that was being exercised. I can't fully explain it, but it just seems too very weird a coincidence. And this gets into, we mentioned beforehand, I think, about the off air, about the 9, because the 9 were behind the 100th Monkey Camp events of the 1990s. So you might want to come in on that, David.
No, I don't. I mean, the floor is yours, Claire. I mean,
Oh.
I think most of our listeners will probably know about the nine and the intelligences that are guiding certain unfoldments at the moment. But I prefer you to give your take.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, just to briefly recap, I mean, the nine are supposedly they claim to be the Ennead, which is the 9 aspects of God represented by the top 9 deities of the Egyptian pantheon. But and they do seem to have some kind of existence, because Andrea Puharic, who was the chap who was involved with them most consistently over a long period of time, he did seem to be able to produce some rather interesting results in terms of them knowing answers that, the channelers in the group who were, doing the channeling couldn't possibly have known. But at the same time, this doesn't demonstrate that they are God, as I've said about Jung, I mean, I do believe that there is just an immense realm of what we would think of as discarnate beings from other dimensions, who are all basically hovering on the threshold of consciousness, trying to, get involved with the interesting events on planet Earth. And it's kind of, over the years, it became apparent to me that there was an element amongst the people who were organising it who, and this became apparent to me when I went up to the 2015 camp, who are strongly in favour of open borders, this whole situation that we're getting at the moment. And it just seems rather strange to me that these things all kind of collide. And I'm not... And I think I mentioned in the book about how, you can't trust discarnate beings when they say things. So, it was to find out that people who are actively themselves promoting open borders, people who've had long-term, lifelong leftist strong leftist things back as far as Paris in 1968, I kind of realised that the whole 100th Monkey thing wasn't as pristine as it was supposed to be, because we were supposed to be going there with no agendas. We were supposed to meditate. We were supposed to remote view. We were supposed to bring stuff back and find new solutions or find opportunities, not impose outcomes. So I'm inclined to think, and I wrote a paper on this, which if people want to go to my one of my blogs, I'll give you the links for those. It's pcnewspeak.blogspot.com, I think it is, in which I talk about it'll be my wakingthemonkey.blogspot.com, sorry, where I go into the background of this. There's an immense background that I wasn't aware of at the time. And in fact, I only, after I'd completed the book, discovered a lot of this. And I'm inclined to think that whatever the 9 are, that they are not 9 aspects of God, and that a deeper kind of archetypal, well, this is what the trickster is. When the surface level gets too rigid, the trickster emerges, because the universe says, oh no, this is getting ossified, this is getting stuck, we need to stir things up a little bit, so I think that's why I was triggered, if I can use that word, to play a kind of trickster role in the camp at the time. And by the 3rd camp, this was kind of, causing a situation whereby it was becoming conscious what was going on, that the camp was being designed to manipulate people's feelings, because, of course, these feelings go out much more strongly on the ether than just mere thoughts. So I think it's very...
fascinating.
Sorry, say again?
Absolutely fascinating.
Oh, thank you, Dave. Yeah. So, I mean, I've got so much on that unfortunately, I don't know whether I'll ever get round to writing accounts of the second and third camps, but I really hope I do, because there's so much that came out, and it by the end, it was clear to me that there are elements within the New Age movement who clearly want to not bring about, a revolution in consciousness that will be spontaneous and it will be right, but to use this to their own political ends by creating morphic fields with mass group meditation. Now, I know this, it's a bit woo-woo, but, the evidence on remote viewing is quite strong that, this stuff, there is something behind this. It's not just complete fantasy.
I think on that note, you've got to come back on the show, Cliff. I think on that note, Paul, you are called back in.
Yeah, no, that was, I was just enjoying sitting back listening to that all. It's, and definitely, excuse me, definitely I think we need to have you back on the show, because you touch on a lot of something. We've obviously touched on the obvious subjects that you've talked about before and your book, but I'm sure we could go a lot deeper into stuff, and yeah, I'll be looking forward to that one.
If I can just throw out an idea for that kind of invitation, Paul and David, is that, as I've mentioned also, in our correspondence, I'm very, very interested. I've already mentioned Tolkien. I'm very, very interested in Tolkien. And he has been, I've only in the last kind of 5 years, really, kind of come to realize the importance of Tolkien. I mean, I've loved his books since I was a teenager, but and I've always been more of a C.S. Lewis fan, actually, but in the last 5 years I've really immensely got into Tolkien, and a lot of that was to do with the fact that he lived less than a mile from where I do, nearly 100 years ago. And so that, when I started thinking about that, that took me into a whole new dimension of what I would call kind of discovered akasha in the local, what I call the mythic environment around here. And of course, you can see that's kind of getting into this, archetypal stuff. So it will quite strongly link into this, levels that I've already been talking about.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, I'm afraid that is all we got time for. We're just around that time now. Is there anything you'd like to let our listeners know about before we say goodbye? Anything?
Oh, well, I'll just mention, obviously, my book, Waking the Monkey, exclamation mark, Waking the Monkey, exclamation mark. It's available from lulu.com. You just put in Waking the Monkey and Claire Ray Randall. That's Ray, R-A-E. It's also available on Amazon, but they take a whole lot more royalties. But Amazon obviously has the Kindle, which I think a lot of people would, find accessible. It's only a couple of quid, and it's, that's where you get it from. And then I have several blogs. As I said, pcnewspeak.blogspot.com is my political blog. Wakingthemonkey.blogspot.com is my kind of mystical and philosophical blog about this New Age stuff. And I've also got one, cosmicclaire.blogspot.com, that I haven't added to for some time, but there's some interesting back articles on that. So those are the main things. And I am on Facebook and Twitter at Waking the Monkey.
Brilliant. Well, I'll be looking forward to the next one. Until then, take care, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
And that was Claire Ray Randall. A fascinating talk, that, and I meant that. Definitely looking forward to getting Claire back on the show. An interesting subject. The first time we've touched on that one in the show, and I think it was a good introduction. What do you think, Dave?
Oh, Paul, I mean, she's a fascinating person, quite a gifted writer, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of vivacious energy, deep insight. Very excited that we finally made contact, and she certainly needs to come back on the show.
Yeah, it's I think she's one of those people that is we can touch on some really interesting subjects, and just bring her perspective to subjects as well, because it's just interesting listening to people with different perspectives. And obviously with different situations and so on. It all spices it up, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, way back when they didn't know things like there were even male and female brains, so the whole of gender studies, when it's real, is actually quite fascinating, but so impossibly complex. I mean, these young whippersnappers simply can't know what they're talking about. But, and also I've tended to notice through the years that gay, lesbian and transgendered people have a natural psychic sensitivity. I wonder what's going on there. Well, maybe we can open that up next time.
That's an interesting, because she touched on the Ask the Truth thing, and that's quite interesting, because in the olden days, there was this thing, the women were very much into the sorcery and that kind of the mystical side of the religion, and there were men that done it as well, but they were kind of teased a little bit because they were a bit effeminate and stuff. So it's kind of, even back then, obviously, things, I mean, you would have think that things would have changed as they have done to now, but it just shows you that it was still going on back then, and the mindset behind that side of it, you know what I mean? And that, like you say, more sort of effeminate men tend to be more perceptive, as women are in that kind of field. It's interesting. That's definitely a subject for the future, I think.
Well, I think it goes deeper than even that, curiously. I mean, certainly she touched upon, something that fascinates me, the interface between heathenry and Christianity, which is one of my main obsessions. And we've talked a lot about it off air, and maybe we ought to open that up at some point. But what tended to happen in the literature, the women were the mystics, the men actually were the magicians, commanding these experiences to take shape and form. I mean, that maybe is one of the reasons they achieved such heights in understanding all of this. But as I say, let's get Claire back on and see what she thinks.
Definitely. And all you guys out there listening, thanks for tuning in. And please let me know what you think about this show. It's always good to hear from you. That is all we got time for. Keep telling your friends about the show, keep linking the show, and more importantly, keep downloading the show. We're going to be looking forward to the next time. We've got some great stuff with Shana coming up, Shana and Stephanie. I'll be back again with Mr. Parry and John White, and we're all going to be looking forward to it. Thanks again. Take care and see you soon. Or speak to you soon, should I say. Bye.
Chowsy, chowsy.
Some ways it's at least trying to change the whole structure of gender and this kind of stuff, and it's very controversial. A lot of debates out there about it. I mean, I think you have to be very an unpleasant person not to allow people that are different in society the chance to live a good life and to enjoy their lives like everyone else. But at the same time, we see with this crazy social justice warriorism that's out there, as usual, there's a lot of resentment around these subjects because of the way some are carrying it forward and politicising it. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that with Claire. Also her book, Waking the Monkey, Becoming the 100th Monkey. So we're going to be talking about that and a few other bits and pieces as well, because she obviously indulges in a lot of things. It isn't just, she's not just there talking about transsexualism because of what she is, who she is. But obviously she's got a lot to say, so I'm really looking forward to this one. And without any further ado, I think before we should go to the other side of London for a surgeon, a dramaturge, and a man called David Parry.
Some enchanted evening, you will see a stranger. You will see a stranger across a crowded room. Good evening, Mr. Obertelli. Have you missed my songs?
I have very much. I've missed your songs. Again, it seems like a while since you've been here with me. How are you doing? All right?
It is a while since I think I've done that song before, actually. It is a while because I'm a busy bee at the minute. But yeah, too long. I've missed you and I've missed THA.
Yes, and we've missed you as well. It's we've obviously had John White on the show a few times, and Shana's been kicking ass. with Stephanie, but we do like to hear from our resident host, Mr. David Parry.
Always a pleasure and good to be back alive. Coming to this evening's interview rather late in the day, I confess that.
Well, yeah.
Kind of widely in our society these days. It's based on my own experiences when I went to a New Age camp called the Hundredth Monkey camp in the 1990s. And it was really quite an extraordinary experience. But my own experience of it was very different from, I think, what the organisers wanted. We'd probably better go into my own, personal background a little bit first, in that, as some of your listeners will know, I'm a transsexual woman, and I went through that process in the mid-1980s. So when I went to the 100th Monkey Camp, this was already behind me, but at the same time I was carrying a certain level of, what you might say, otherness with me. And I've had a bit of difficulty fitting in at the camp, and it wasn't because everybody was saying, there's that tranny, but it seemed to be more working at a much more kind of subtle level, where I engaged with what I carried, what many would call like the trickster archetype energy. And this has kind of been a path that I've, meandered along my whole life. And the two streams of my own gender identity issues and the New Age seem to have kind of got woven together in a strange way, even though it's completely unintentional on my part. So what the camp was intending to do was try and create what they was described as a morphic field of progress, forwardness in world events. And I'll get onto this later.
Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds. Hello, I'm Paul Obertelli, and welcome to another edition of THA Talks, the alternative podcast show from the UK. Our talks include news, conspiracies, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion, and much more. If you'd like to check out our full archive, just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. And if there's anyone who'd like to contact us and give us some feedback, maybe you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, you can email us info@thatalks.com, or you can go to our website and contact us via the contact tab there. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show via our RSS feed, and you can also find us on iTunes and Stitcher and many other podcast directories out there. Well, thanks again for joining me here on THA Talks. It's always a pleasure. And I have another fascinating guest for you again, as always, this week. It's a subject that we haven't covered here on THA Talks yet, and it's one that I've wanted to. We're going to be speaking with Claire Ray Randall, who's actually a transsexual, and she's done a lot of shows talking about that and the science behind it, and to a level of controversy, because it seems to be a controversial subject at the moment, where the idea of accepting it and obviously allowing these people to be happy in society and not be persecuted, which is absolutely correct. And also just the general perception of what it is, what's transgenderism and transsexualism, what it is, how to perceive it. And it's kind of...
But I think that it did... Well, there's some very strange, curious synchronicities around it, which I've only, in the last year or so, really come to understand. But what I got from it was a greater sense of my own personal spiritual empowerment, which I had not, anticipated as part of the process. Because obviously, going through, my transsexual transition in the 80s, it was I was kind of on the edge, felt quite outcast. I mean, one thing that I feel very strongly that kind of relates in an oppositional kind of way to where the world is with the trans agenda is that the way that it went for me was, well, is that this was an extremely marginal thing. I had to overcome not least my own resistance to it, my feeling about society, the general, sort of, it wasn't a mainstream part of society in those days.
Yeah.
And I actually think this is right. So I went through that, and I kind of consolidated a new identity long before the current kind of cultural Marxist agenda of promoting transgenderism came along, quite recently, within the last 5 to 10 years. I feel I'd probably better just maybe pause there a little bit and let you come back on what I've said already before I take it any further, Paul.
No, yeah, I think what's very interesting, I've listened to some you talk in interviews before, is it's just interesting because you come from such a level-headed perspective, because obviously it's been a short notice one because I've kind of been so unorganised myself, but Claire's very interesting. She's got a lot of qualifications, she's very smart, and obviously transsexualism is a subject we haven't touched on before, so that added to the interest of getting her on the show. It's obviously nowadays as well, it's quite a kind of controversial subject in some movements, and it's just something we hear quite a lot about, so I'm looking forward to this one.
Oh, Paul, don't get me wrong. I mean, free thoughts and open minds. Yes, we've not tackled this particular subject before. I'm looking forward to it immensely.
Let's go. Hello, Claire. Welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. It's most exciting.
Well, I'm very, very happy that you accepted our invitation. We haven't touched on the subjects that we're going to be talking about today on the show before, so we're excited about that. We also want to talk about your book, Waking the Monkey, Becoming the 100th Monkey, that you've had out. That's got very popular and is people are very excited about it. So we're going to be talking about that later. You're a very interesting person. I've listened to you on other interviews before. You've obviously got a different perspective on certain views around transsexualism and the social justice warrior movement. This is what makes your perspective interesting, because obviously there's so many different perspectives out there, and the mainstream one is a little bit different to perhaps how you see things. How about you let us know a bit about your book and how you got started, and just a bit about yourself?
My book, it's about basically the origins of the New Age that we now see being manifested quite